Good afternoon. My name is Alex Uballez. I'm the United States Attorney here for the District of New Mexico. Appreciate you all joining us this afternoon. We are here to make an announcement regarding a case that was just sentenced. I will make some introductory remarks and introduce my friends here to speak a little bit further. I'm here to announce the sentencing of George Martinez for his crimes, and there are many of them, of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering. Investigators with the IRS, Criminal Investigation Phoenix Field Office, the FBI, Albuquerque Field Office, and the New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department's Tax Fraud and Investigations Division worked hard to investigate and apprehend and determine the full scope of Mr. Martinez's wrongdoings in this case. I'd like to thank each of those agencies for their work here, as well as our dedicated federal prosecutors, Assistant United States Attorney Jeremy Pena, who stands here with me today, former Assistant United States Attorney Paul Scheid, who is still with Department of Justice, just in a different district, their supervisor, the Section Supervisor for Public Integrity Crimes, Fred Federici, and all of our staff here who supported this. So today, in the United States Federal Court, a federal judge sentenced Mr. Martinez to a term of 94 months in prison. The judge ordered that Mr. Martinez pay more than $1.2 million in restitution and imposed a money judgment in the amount of $687,797. You'll hear a little bit more of the facts of this matter from AUSA Pena and from the FBI in a second, but I just want to say that our system of governance is complex and it relies on a vast and interconnected network of mechanisms, but the system only exists with the trust and faith of the people that we serve. And so there are a few more important pressure points in this system for a democracy than the system that funds it. And so the services that the people of New Mexico deserve are funded by that system of tax collection. And so we will aggressively protect your tax dollars from fraud, especially when driven by the greed of a corrupt government official. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to AUSA Jeremy Pena for a summary of the facts in this matter and its process to this good sentence.
As you may know from previous reporting, Mr. Martinez worked for about 16 years at the New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department. For most of that time, he served actually as the chief of the Questionable Refund Unit. In that capacity, he was entrusted with a duty to investigate suspicious tax refunds and to protect and to preserve the public funds of the state of New Mexico. Instead, Mr. Martinez chose to break that trust. He used his knowledge of the state's fraud detection systems to evade those systems. He used the identities of family members and others to generate fraudulent refunds and redirected those refunds to himself in a series of 9 different bank accounts that he controlled. All told, from 2009 until 2018, he stole in that manner more than $1.2 million from the state and from the people of New Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you. AUSA Pena will stick around for questions after the FBI statement regarding the facts and process of this case. I'll introduce FBI Special Agent in Charge, Raul Bujanda.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, Jeremy.
Step over the side.
So when you hear the words FBI, all of you have already some kind of response. When I say the words, the 3 letters IRS, especially right now during tax season, you all really have a response, including one in my stomach right now. But when you combine the FBI with the IRS and the US Attorney's Office, what you have is justice, and justice was served. So we're looking at George Martinez, who abused his position of trust over a period of more than 7 years and took almost $1.2 million out of the pockets of hardworking New Mexicans, all of us. So I want to thank especially the investigative team, the FBI special agents that were a part of this, the IRS and their personnel that contributed to this, but also the New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department. Even though they were looking at one of their own, they didn't make sure that that relationship that they had with that employee stopped them from doing the right thing. We hope today's sentencing sends a warning to anyone in government who might be tempted to do wrong by the American people. The FBI and law enforcement partners are going to come after you. and we'll make you pay every single cent that you take from our taxpayers back. Anyone that has information on public corruption or the abuse of government frauds, I encourage you to contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or at fbitips.fbi.gov. I want to say one last thing, that without this investigative team, without these individuals that are to my left and to my right, this could not have happened. It's the great relationship that we have within law enforcement and the U.S. Attorney's Office that makes cases like this possible. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alex so that he can answer all of your questions.
Thanks, Raul. So AUSA Pena handled this matter from through much of its charging and prosecution, and through the plea and sentence that happened today. As I mentioned before, there's another AUSA who began it, but for factual questions and questions regarding the procession of the case and where it's going to go forward, I'll turn you to him. Thank you all.
Was Mr. Martinez taken into custody today? Had he been on conditions of release prior?
He had been on conditions of release, but at the time of pronouncement of the sentence, the judge ordered his remand into custody. Yes.
Technical question, what's the difference between $1.2 million in restitution and a $680,000 judgment? Do those like overlap at all? I'm just not sure what that term is.
They do overlap as far as his acts, although those are separate remedies, and so he owes both. And the reason that there is a difference is the charging document in the indictment stretches back a certain amount of time. The conduct that occurred before the indicted dates, since it went back so long, that's called relevant conduct, and he is to be held responsible for the full scope of his conduct, even though it might have occurred before the limitations period or before the period charged in the indictment.
Mr. Martinez, it seems like he had 7 years worth of taxation refunds that he received, that he was taking. How come it took so long before it was noticed, before it started to become investigated?
It's an absolutely great question, and the answer is because of his role. The role that he was entrusted with as chief of the Questionable Refunds Unit. He was very familiar with the types of refunds that would trigger a red flag by the automated software that would do audits. And it was eventually, after many years of doing the conduct, that there was an internal review that reviewed those safeguards and found his activity.
And was any of that money spent on anything, or was that just solely put into his own bank accounts?
The hearings today, the sentencing hearings today, described a series of large expenditures at casinos, amongst other expenses for himself and his family members.
Was he gambling locally? Can you just tell us what kind of games he was into, or sports, cards?
He was gambling locally. I couldn't tell you whether he was. I don't think that he was into sports or cars in particular. It was games.
Now that we've seen this all transpire and the investigation go on, now that you guys have a conclusion to this, how will you guys assure that nobody else that is in his position in the future breaks the law and breaks this trust?
I think that this matter is well known to everybody, especially at New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department at this point. The safeguards are improving every day, and we saw in the trajectory of the case the fact that the safeguards did improve, and that's how he was eventually tripped up. So his patterns have been understood. The exact methods by which he was assigning refunds to himself are now well known, and they know what to look for.
Do we know if any of the family members that were involved with some of those deposits that were made will also be investigated separately?
There's no allegation of any wrongdoing by anyone other than Mr. Martinez.
The families that were impacted by the tax refunds being taken, are they going to have their money returned to them?
So they are not, those people are not actually out any money. They were supposedly issued refunds, so the New Mexico computers would have shown that refunds were issued to them, and so there would be, theoretically, New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department could demand their money back, but of course it's known that they didn't receive any of the money. They won't be at risk.
This seems like it was a pretty strong case for Mr. Martinez to just say, I'm going to plead it out. Can you talk about how that all came about?
I think it would be inappropriate for me to comment on the process of reaching a plea bargain in this case. So you can see that the litigation proceeded at a good pace.
And I could be wrong, so correct me, but does your sentencing memorandum, were you requesting 70 to 87 months in prison, and then the judge gave 94? So
Yes, so to clarify, the 70 to 87 that was requested, that is the properly calculated federal sentencing guideline range for most of the offenses. A small subset of the offenses are aggravated identity theft counts, and those have a 2-year mandatory term of imprisonment which must run consecutively to any other sentence. So the 94 months is the 70-month sentence described for the wire fraud counts and money laundering counts, plus the 24 months for the aggravated identity theft counts.
Real quick, can you just reiterate what his sentencing is one more time for us?
He is sentenced to a term of 94 months imprisonment, and then upon his release, he will be on supervised release for a term of 3 years.
With restitutions, correct?
Yes.
So he'll have to pay almost $2 million and so the restitution would go to the state of New Mexico, that's the victim.
That's
and
correct.
The $680,000 goes
To the United States, yes.
to, okay.
But restitution comes first, and so the funds will go back to the state of New Mexico first and foremost, and then the United States would come afterwards for the forfeiture amount.
Okay,
Thank you all.
Any further questions? All right.
No, I think that does.
Thank you all for being here. Great to see you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great night. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Raul.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Yeah.